Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Daniel Nichanian, creator of What's on the Ballot, on the most important election results you may have missed from last week. Also on the program today, CBO score not expected for the full Build Back Better bill for at least a week. Meanwhile, Congress still facing a debt ceiling and a government funding crisis. Republican lawmakers look to punish the Republican House members who voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. More than 360,000 children under the age of 12 have received vaccinations. And the Biden administration is to seek boosters for all. Meanwhile, a federal court backs the United Airlines vaccine mandate. The January 6th committee issues more subpoenas to Trumpistas, including John Eastman and Jason Miller. Rest in peace, Max Cleland, former senator, vet, triple amputee, lost his seat when Republicans said he was like Osama bin Laden. New York Times Wirecutter site. Workers threaten a walkout during Black Friday. Meanwhile, 800 Scranton teachers on day 5 of their strike. Lastly, Israel now using facial recognition software to track and surveil Palestinians in the occupied territories. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is Tuesday, or as we call it around here, Tuesday.
Day of twos, because it's the second work day.
Right, correct.
Yeah, deuces.
Emma's here. She's drunk.
Yeah.
Emma Vigeland, hello.
Hello, Sam.
Just want to remind people, Emma, I'm not you. You remember this, but we was it about a month ago? We had on a couple of was it one or two representatives from from the New York City Taxi Workers Alliance, and at the time, we were talking to them about the incredible burden that they had. They were pushed years ago. They were sort of pushed and fed. It was almost predatory lending, providing them funds to buy New York taxi medallions, which is essentially like a license I guess the analogy would be a liquor license for a liquor store. And, but the city provided funds so that they could jack up the value of the medallions for them. And then, of course, Uber came in and COVID came in, and you had taxi drivers who were stuck with hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, each individual.
Even before COVID, there were multiple suicides in front of City Hall because cabbies were so in debt. Because, I mean, because the city just basically gave away the farm to Uber, as has the governments throughout the country.
And they were looking for some form of debt relief, a cram down on these loans. And they had been engaging in a hunger strike for almost 2 weeks, I think it was. Well, just the other day, Bill de Blasio capitulated, agreed to have the city serve as a backstop for the debt that past administrations had essentially loaded onto drivers in this predatory fashion. It will allow the cabbies, some of whom, many of whom have debt that is well over $500,000. It will reduce their debts to $170,000 at most. Still an extraordinary amount, but at least you can conceive of being able to pay it off with the money that you're earning as a cab driver. The loan payments will also be capped at $1,100 per month. And so this is good news for the taxi drivers in this city. Wiping out the entire debt would have been better, but at least they have a fighting chance now.
And good of de Blasio, I mean, not good of, he should have eliminated all the debt, but it's important that this was done in the lame duck period.
Yeah.
Because Eric Adams is going to be less sympathetic to these kinds of...
One might imagine.
Yeah. Is my guess. I mean, he could prove us wrong, but not off to a hot start with his rhetoric right now.
Since we're on the topic of New York City and transportation, this was a sort of a fascinating, glimpse into just how effed we are in this society. And the backdrop of this, of course, the concern about wokeness, the concern about CRT.
You're looking for racism everywhere.
You're looking for, you want to racialize everything. And this was supposed to be all over after the president was black. So why are you looking for racism everywhere? And it is, one of the things that we try and do on this program is to provide some historical context of some major themes in American history. But you should be aware that history is not a series of snapshots. That's not what history is. The way that we examine it can be, but there is a reality that exists. It is not chopped up into moments.
There's an inheritance.
There's an inheritance. And sometimes it's almost like you can't even, the inheritance doesn't just happen when one era dies. It is an ongoing inheritance that exists. Every second that emerges is embedded with the second that preceded it. And it is important to understand this history so that you can really assess what's happening in the moment. Because if you're not aware of what has happened in the past, your imagination for what is possible in terms of what is going on right now is severely limited. And it gets even more severely limited if you have people who are propagandizing and trying to change that past history. Whether it's Dennis Prager going, can you imagine if we treated the way that we treat the unvaccinated now, if we had treated AIDS patients that way?
He was saying there was no stigma associated with having AIDS.
It was, we'll go on and on into that, but it was way beyond anything that we're seeing today. I mean, just by leaps and bounds.
Yes.
But he can say that because even though that was certainly within his lifetime, Certainly within his lifetime, where he was probably talking about how disgusting gay people were for having AIDS.
And racializing it too.
In this country, we have very little historical understanding of where we come. There has been an ongoing project in this country to obscure certain realities. The lost cause. There was an entire movement built around obscuring the reasons for the Civil War in this country. So here's Pete Buttigieg, not necessarily my favorite person, an intelligent guy who for much of his career, I think, has not used his intelligence in the way that I would appreciate. But facts are facts. And here he is giving a speech at a press conference at the White House. And I don't know exactly what he was referring to, but this concept that can infrastructure be racist? In other words, I think everybody understands that like a building is not racist in and of itself, but the way that it's designed. I mean, for instance, is slavery racist? It's just a thing. Doesn't exist. It exists, as a generic thing. But slavery in this country was racist. And slavery is always wrong, but it was specifically racist in this country. But here's the talk. Play the clip.
As to where we target those dollars, I'm still surprised that some people were surprised when I pointed to the fact that if a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or that would have been, in New York was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices. I don't think we have anything to lose by confronting that simple reality. And I think we have everything to gain by acknowledging it and then dealing with it, which is why the Reconnecting Communities, that $1 billion, is something we want to get to work right away, putting to work.
And apparently, everybody, he was expressing shock to how people reacted the first time he talked about it. Well, I got news for you. The third time he talks about it, he's going to express shock about the way that people reacted the second time he talked about it.
Total conniption.
Yeah, we don't want to think about this. We don't want to think about this.
It wasn't even like that. It was even more clueless than that. It was like, you idiot.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Of course, liberals seeing racism in every corner of society.
He was speaking specifically about the machinations of a guy named Robert Moses, who was, I think he had like a dozen different, I don't know how many different titles he had in New York, but it was basically public works, city, Department of Parks. I can't remember the
czar of moving around, I think.
Yes. And Robert Caro wrote the definitive biography of him, although I don't even think there was any other biography. But
Power Broker, yep.
And this was a very popular book back when I was in my 20s and 30s. I don't know when it was produced, but I think it was around there. I mean, I think I read it around college.
It was in the 70s, I think.
Okay. But it became very people became much more aware of it, it seemed to me, around that time. And Moses was apparently, according to Caro, one of the most racist people I've ever met.
He basically drove chauffeured around in New York being racist and figuring out how to ruin neighborhoods with highways and stuff.
Robert Moses was reportedly, when he was involved in building public pools in the city, making pools for black Americans colder than ones that had that white people had access to.
Also from this book, I think.
Yes, same book.
And apparently he also felt like, look, you can pass laws, but you can change those laws. But what you cannot change as easily is concrete. Mm-hmm. And do we have the passage?
It's right here.
Yeah, I got it here.
Can we put it up too?
Yeah. I'll read it. Underlying Moses' strikingly strict policing for cleanliness in his parks was Francis Perkins realized with shock, deep distaste for the public that was using them. He doesn't love people, she was to say. It used to shock me because he was doing all these things for the welfare of the people. He denounced the common people terribly. To him, they were lousy, dirty people throwing bottles all over Jones Beach. I'll get them, I'll teach them. He loves the public, but not his people. I'll skip a little bit ahead here. Now he began to take measures to limit use of his parks. He had restricted the use of state parks by poor and lower middle class families in the first place by limiting access to the park. So not just racist, but classist, I just add there. By limiting access to the parks by rapid transit, he had vetoed the Long Island Railroad's proposed construction of a branch spur to Jones Beach for this reason. Now he began to limit access by buses. He instructed Shapiro to build the bridges across his new parkways too low for buses to pass. Bus trips therefore had to be made on local roads, making the trips discouragingly long and arduous. For Negroes, whom he considered inherently dirty, there were further measures. Buses needed permits to enter state parks. Buses chartered by Negro groups found it very difficult to obtain permits, etc., etc.
This is the way that you segregate societies without having to put up a sign saying that society is segregated.
Just like you can be racist if you don't, scream racist expletives. They make the bar really low on purpose in order to clear themselves of any wrongdoing.
Well, they make it about individual bigotry and not structural policy.
And there's nothing more structural than our infrastructure.
Right, and this whole playing coy about this, we all know what wrong side of the tracks means, right? We all have a common sense awareness that these sorts of grand decisions do have implications for people and political implications.
And we have to understand redlining.
The point is, with the wrong side of the tracks, same thing with the way they did the highway system, very much so in the 50s and whatnot. We're going to segregate the city by putting literally a barrier in the middle of the city. So we will cut the, I-290 will go through these neighborhoods here and make sure that it's very difficult for you to cross over from the poor section, very often maybe the black section of a city, into this other section, the white section. And the way that you set up public transport, I mean, we just had this happen, 5-6 years ago with the
look at the subway map.
The Atlanta, the Georgian, what do they call it? Whatever the Georgia transit system was to go out to.
Was it BART?
I don't know. I think that's San Francisco, but out to Cobb County and to the stadium for the Braves because they didn't want to allow poor people, and very often these stops also in black neighborhoods, to get to the game. I mean, this is a big thing in sports in general, putting the stadiums way out in the suburbs. Atlanta Hawks basketball team had a thing where they're like, are we getting a little bit too... The owners, I can't remember exactly what they said, but they were anxious about the demographics of who was showing up at their basketball games. And does that mean that the stadium itself is racist? I mean, come on. Do you really get like a child?
Yep. Well, I mean, the Braves stadium might be a little racist.
Well, that's true. Inherent in the name.
Yeah, but tomahawk chop.
But I mean, this is the grown-ups understand this. We will talk about the child who doesn't understand it later.
Well, Tucker and Joe Rogan and all those types.
Right. This idea, and we can go back. You can see this in the things, in some instances, it's not necessarily, the intent isn't necessarily to be racist, and there also can be racism. There's racism embedded in our tax code. Go back and listen to the interview with Dorothy Brown. It's simply because of the way that our system works.
But I mean,
where the political power is shapes the nature of our society. And so if you have a segment of the population that has been historically denied political power, and that can be both on a class basis and a race basis, then the way that the city or the state or the nation is structured, both in terms of physical and non-physical infrastructure, is going to reflect the desires and the will of the people in power, which means it's going to necessarily disadvantage people who have been out of power.
Just focus on what the Rogan types and the Tucker types choose to naturalize and what they're curious about. They're deliberately incurious or uncurious about like these historical facts that we can print out and look at in front of our eyes. They don't want to learn about that, but then they can conspiracy theorize about, I don't know, DMT when it comes to Rogan, or January 6th when it comes to Tucker.
I will say this. I think you've described Rogan to some extent, but Tucker Carlson knows.
I know. Yeah.
He is just a bigoted liar, period. Rogan may be a little bit ignorant in specific or a lot ignorant in specific areas, and listening to Tucker knows exactly,
and he likes it.
What he's doing.
He likes the way this is.
He is a fabricator.
Yeah.
All right, folks. A couple of things. First off, don't forget January 6th.
January 16th.
January 6th is going to be 10 days before January 16th this year. It's going to fall on a 10 days before, like it always does.
Yeah.
And on January 16th, we are going to rush the Wilbur Theater
yes.
in Boston, Mass. And you can join us. You can get into our secret cabal of planning by going to Majority Live and buying a ticket. And we will send you instructions on how to get there and what we're going to do.
In invisible ink.
In invisible ink. And then we're going to hang, never.
Make a scaffold.
We're going to make a scaffold. So check it out. Majority Live to get your tickets. And today's program brought to you by one of my favorite sponsors. That's right. Sunset Lake Sabbath. SunsetLakeSabbath.com. Use the code LeftIsBest. Get 20% off. Folks, I will tell you that there are two main things that I've been using Sunset Lake Sabbath for. One is, well, actually three, now that I think about it. Well, four. One is to sleep.
I used it last night. The best sleep I've had in weeks because I've been so stressed about this apartment search I was been doing. It's finally over. Sunset Lake Sabbath knocked me out. Feeling great.
Number two, I will also sometimes use that tincture or a gummy bear when the kids are being particularly difficult. I'm sorry, that's just the case, okay? Also, I realized that in summer, first blast of summer, first couple of blasts, I get some eczema. I've been using that arnica, and it's really for muscle rub, but that's what I used it for. And the fourth thing is I give it as gifts. People love this stuff. And Sunset Lake Sabbath is not like, well, I don't know. I'm sure there's other places somewhere around the country that must have this level of integrity, but they have their Sabbath Day assessed by third parties that give you a full breakdown of everything that's in there, so you know you're not getting junk. They also use integrated pest management. They don't use pesticides. 100% organic fertilizer. And they have a whole array of great products. Gummies, fudge, coffee, hand rubs, smokables, keefs, smalls, pre-rolls. And they're a great company. $15 minimum wage, mostly employee owned. They support strikers. They support people in their community, Afghan refugees. And we're going to do something with them in the coming weeks. Just a great company all around. You will not be sorry about this one. Sunset Lake Sabbath Day. SunsetLakeSabbath.com. Use the code LeftIsBest for 20% off. Okay, want to welcome back to the program the proprietor of the What's on the Ballot, aggregate, I don't even know what to call this. It's a one-stop resource for everything you could possibly want to know that is being voted upon in upcoming elections and follow-up. Daniel Nichanian, welcome back to the program. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Daniel.
So people knew about the top line, obviously the governor's race in Virginia. I think the governor's race in New Jersey. And I think there was some awareness too of what was going on in Minneapolis. There were a lot of narratives built up from these, which we would have no way of testing but for other elections that take place. So we can see the will of people as they're reflected. And in some ways, some of these elections are more narrowly tailored to these issues than something like, the governorship. So let's dig into this. You have a piece that was in, I guess it was in Politico, the most important election results you missed. Let's go through some of these, and you can tell us why, why they're important. There was a lot of local elections that took place on that Tuesday. Let's just start with with the war on drugs. There's been a lot of pushback, and on some level, it also just sort of like makes you wonder, like, why aren't the National Democrats doing more on this? Like, it's such a gimme.
Over 80%, I think, of Americans approve of legalizing cannabis recreationally, and Biden could do that with the stroke of a pen, but he hasn't done it.
So, Daniel, walk us through where some key places where the war on drugs has fallen apart.
Yeah, I mean, that's already a great framing, Emma, because it seems like Washington, D.C. is still, as in the federal government, is still debating cannabis and the smallest steps on cannabis. Joe Biden obviously ran against legalizing marijuana, though he said he would reduce criminal penalties, whereas the rest of the country and voters seems to have already moved way past the conversation on cannabis. States like Michigan, South Dakota, and other red states in past years have already legalized it through referendums. And what's interesting is that in local elections and referendums, the debate, the conflicts are more about what to do with the war on drugs more generally already. So perhaps the most interesting referendum on this issue on last week was that Detroit decriminalized the possession of mushrooms and psychedelics. And that's also building on a trend that started a couple of years ago. Places like Ann Arbor, Washington, D.C. at the local level, and Oregon have taken similar steps, and it passed by a very large margin. And what we've seen elsewhere in prosecutor races, more specifically in places like Austin last year, Philly this year, Virginia prosecutor races had the same conversation this year. We're seeing a conversation about whether the criminal legal system should step back overall from prosecuting, from going after drug possession, because of the harm that the war on drugs has really created around the country, and the fact that it hasn't actually produced results in terms of substance use and so on. And so that's a very interesting contrast of DC can't even get its act together on cannabis, and the conversation elsewhere has moved on to a bigger, bolder conversation already.
And I think it's indicative of the I mean, look, this is such a gimme, such an obvious political benefit for Democrats with a whole host of people. But I think we are watching like a perfect example of how ossified the leadership is in the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Putting aside from an ideological standpoint, just in the sheer politics here, they're not doing this because they're afraid of the backlash from a cohort of conservatives who are never going to vote for them anyways. And I mean, there's no other explanation, because if you wanted to slow the roll of this happening from the federal government, you could do affirmative things to keep this from happening on the local level. Yet they're just basically staying away from it because they don't want to be implicated. They are perfectly willing just to let it happen on its own and then just be fine and let it go away, because they're bad at politics.
I'm going to give you another example that really didn't get a lot of play this year, but I thought it was a fascinating thing that happened in 2021, which is that in the spring, the Washington State Supreme Court struck down the laws that prohibited drug possession in Washington State. So from one day to the next in Washington State, drug possession writ large was legal. And Oregon had just done something similar last year in a referendum of decriminalizing drug possession and trying to move away from the war on drugs, from the idea that the tools of criminalization are the solution to this, to addiction and substance use. And Democrats there recriminalized drug possession in the spring through a state bill at a lower level than before, but still, like the conversation within the Democratic Party hasn't embraced the fact that there's a lot of voters, including in nearby Oregon in that case, that want a different set of ideas, a different set of solutions to substance use issues.
Yeah, it really is amazing, because it would be, I don't know, it seems to me it would be a huge boon around the country. Also, you mentioned there was a lot of decriminalization of marijuana in Ohio towns as well.
Yeah, so I was just saying we've moved beyond cannabis in some contexts, but there's states like Ohio where at the local level in parts of the country that we don't associate with, obviously, Democratic strength, we're seeing pushes locally in places where the state isn't taking care of it, for voters at the local level to take matters in their own hand and change local ordinances around cannabis. And we saw that in Ohio last week. Yes.
In Kyrsten Sinema, I wonder what this really does say for Kyrsten Sinema when you start to see this type of, and I guess it's possible to read too much into this in terms of what's happening with politicians, because we saw this in Florida too, but $15 minimum wage.
Yeah, in Tucson, Arizona, which is a very large city and kind of the base of democratic politics in many ways in Arizona, because of its size and its blue nature, voted to increase the minimum wage by a very large margin. And it's really, as you were saying, notable because the state senator, Kyrsten Sinema, voted against increasing the minimum wage earlier this year. We have all seen the famous video where she thumbs down the minimum wage increase on the floor of the Senate. There is clearly conflicts within the Democratic base, and we have seen that in many stories. There's a lot of resentment and anger towards their positions, and there isn't in any way an obvious jump from the fact that there is an initiative like this to a primary campaign, but it will be very, very interesting to see how that continues. And in many cases now we have seen voters take matters in their own hand on the minimum wage. It's very low around the country, and initiatives are trying to fix it in place after place.
How much of an infrastructure is built around specifically that type of initiative, right? And I ask because it's not hard to imagine that a lot of those people who were motivated by Kyrsten Sinema voting against it came out and, if I'm an organizer or I'm on, and I'm planning to maybe primary Kyrsten Sinema or get involved in that, I get a bunch of names of people who I know are committed activists to this type of stuff. I ask both because, and maybe it's distinct in each area, but Democrats in Florida seem to be a complete disaster in terms of their organization skills, yet $15 minimum wage passed there. Yeah. And I wonder if around referendums like this, there can be built alternative or parallel institutions or organizations or networks that can be activated in other contexts.
Yeah, one thing first of all, the difference between a primary in Arizona potentially and the general elections that Democrats are losing in Florida, there's a difference in turnout and the importance of organizing in each of them. What's interesting about Sinema is that she's sort of doing this on issue after issue, right? Like the minimum wage, immigration, taxes for the very, very wealthy. Like on every issue, they could be coalitions of organizers willing to prioritize the 2024 Senate race if this continues, right? And yeah, you're absolutely right. It creates infrastructure. In some cases, it can correspond to an infusion of national attention and money for local groups. I mean, we really saw that around Amendment 4 in Florida, where a lot of specific money went around rights restoration a few years ago nationally that otherwise would not have gone. Referendums kind of connect those those local groups, and there was a coalition of local groups in Tucson that I'm going to blank on the names right now, but obviously if you're interested, you should go check them out because they did amazing work in putting that on the ballot and getting it passed.
There has been a rise, it feels like, in things like participatory budgeting. Will you tell us, A, what that is, and then it passed in Boston?
Yeah, no, it's definitely very interesting, and so that really depends on, that will depend always on the particular place and the people there. That is sort of the point. But the point is to take a slice of the city funds, the city budget, and create a process around which the residents of the city, through proposals, meetings, and consultations, and occasionally votings, can shape where that money goes. So, for instance, Seattle has spearheaded some form of participatory budgeting, and they actually had cut the police funding a bit in 2020, and some of that money was allocated to the participatory process for Seattle residents to help shape where the money would go instead of the police. So that was a process that was still ongoing the last time I checked. So in Boston now, a slice of the budget, not a huge slice, but some of the budget will be put in that category as well. The new mayor, who's a progressive, who's one of the success stories for progressives, I think, of the election last week in Boston, had also endorsed the measure, even though technically takes away some of her own authority over the budget. She endorsed it, said it was very important for racial justice and equity, and so that is something that will be interesting to follow in the coming year. It's a bit of a slow process.
So one of we've talked about drug prohibitions dropping around the country, and there's also been there was a lot of stuff, despite the fact of what we heard about in Minneapolis. More attempts at police reform that came from really different angles, ranging from budgetary to oversight organizations, and then also in terms of local courts, in terms of criminal justice. Can you walk us through those?
Yeah. There's always so much to decipher on criminal justice because it's all at the county level and the municipal level, and obviously so many different narratives, some of which go against sort of the one election story that has been proposed as well. So you mentioned Minneapolis. I think that was the top line election in terms of what people see, which was very important. It was a proposal to replace the police department with a department of safety that was going to combine some of the functions of policing with other functions that would be given to non-armed city employees. I've
been corrected on this, that it would allow for that change to happen. It wouldn't have necessarily imposed that change. It would have amended the charter of the city in such a way that could happen.
Okay. And the rent control measure in Minneapolis also went that passed, also is an enabling measure, and the city council probably will sit on it anyway. But on the sort of other major conflict around policing was in Austin, Texas, where the city council cut some of the police funding last year in 2020, and there was a major push by the right in Austin to reverse those cuts and actually increase the police funding and lock Austin into a higher police force that would have been harder to walk back. And that measure lost by a very large margin, I think 2-1 almost last week. So that's sort of the mirror image of a refusal to increase police funding and actually reverse the police budget cuts. And then there were a lot of other measures, a lot of prosecutor races, a Cleveland initiative to increase the oversight over the police with a new board passed very easily. Mayoral races had a lot of debates around policing and the budget of the police. And progressives lost a number of those races, again in Minneapolis, again in this time in Seattle, but also in some of the places where some candidates were proposing a bolder vision of reimagining safety and sort of using similar language around that we saw some activists use in Minneapolis, like to some degree, meeting Shelby in Boston, those candidates won. And this on policing is always a major fight between the police union and the police and police officials that lead the police departments and what voters actually say. So we have seen over and over again when oversight commissions have been introduced either by councils or by voters, we've seen the police union fight those over and over again, occasionally block them through the court or try their best to make them inoperative. And that's so like on these issues, the day after the election is really so important because the police are able to sort of block these reforms in many ways and not abide by them. And the municipal government system is not equipped in terms of political will to a great extent to respond. So that's going to be something very interesting to watch in Cleveland, for instance.
In the past, we've talked to you about key sheriff races and their relationship to ICE. Were there any of those races this time around? Where are we in terms of how immigration policies are executed?
Yeah, things haven't changed immensely when it comes to immigration enforcement in terms of the relationship between local law enforcement and ICE and the conflicts, the organizing around that. That was one of the major areas of progressive wins during the Trump era, getting local law enforcement, often Democrats that were just collaborating with ICE as though it was the most usual, the very routine thing to do, were being defeated as that issue rose. There wasn't so much an issue in 2021 just based on where the elections were for these offices. But these offices, the sheriffs have a lot of different roles and different hats. So one, for instance, hat they have is to manage jail conditions. And jails in the US, a lot of places are mostly catastrophic, squalid conditions with a lot of death inside jails. We are seeing that in New York right now with Rikers is in a state of crisis, and we had some elections like that in New York and New Orleans. Actually, the election is in 3 days. It hasn't happened yet, or 4 days over the weekend. There's an election there where in New Orleans, where the jail, which has been under a consent decree with the federal government for so long, has become a political issue. And on the one hand, it's dispiriting to see the conditions in which people live be an electoral issue because it's a matter of basic human rights, basic human decency. It shouldn't be up to voters to decide whether someone is going to die in jail or not based on the conditions. On the other hand, it's not like we are seeing in these places where these officials have been in power for 10, 20 years without really electoral contestation, with just maybe an appointment or elections that are uncontested. They don't care. No one cares about what's going on inside the jail. And these elections are providing some opportunity for people who do care to put these issues on the table and force people to look at what's happening in the jail in places like New Orleans or elsewhere.
All right. So lastly, let's talk about school boards. Because, actually, I think we've covered in New York State the absolute dismal failure of the election reforms. There was a good constitutional amendment that basically said that people have a right to clean air and clean water in the state, which is going to be very helpful in the context of civil suits against polluters. It's going to be very helpful in the context of what needs to be proven before you start to, I don't know, whatever it is, dig or build a factory or whatever it is, because the burden of proof is going to shift in a lot of these instances. That's all well and good. We had massive failure on expanding access to the ballot. I mean, not even expanding, just making it easier to vote in this state. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, other than it was just an abysmal failure by activists, by the people promoting it. I had barely any awareness of what these ballot measures were, which is shocking because, I both should be more aware. Personally, I should have done a better job, but also, like, how did I not get an email about this?
Yeah, I've gotten so many DMs from strangers, messages over the past week, people who live in New York who feel anguish, some of them, that they themselves may not have thought of flipping over the page of the ballot to remember to vote on the initiatives. There was almost no ad campaign, no efforts by the Democratic Party in New York to support those amendments, make sure they get across the finish line. Whereas conservatives, especially upstate, were running ads and making the presence felt opposition to, again, as you said, very baseline amendments that would have enabled same-day voter registration and no excuse mail voting. Those are things that exist around the country in many, many states, and that failed by a very large margin in New York. We also know that very large chunks of New York City voters who actually went to the polls didn't fill those questions, which, if you don't know what a referendum question is, if you haven't seen anything about it yet, in the moment, it can be a lot to decipher and know how to vote. So the failure of the communication there is really abysmal. And New York's Democratic Party has gotten a lot of flack over the years for not prioritizing voting rights. And this was, adds a chapter to that. And, the head of the Democratic Party was busy going after India Walton, the Democratic nominee for mayor in Buffalo, was running against the write-in bid by the incumbent. So he had time for that, but as far as we see, he had he didn't have that much time or money or funding to spend on these very important initiatives in New York. Yeah.
Let me put a finer point on it. He didn't want it. There's no doubt in my mind that the chairman of the Democratic Party in New York State did not want to increase access to the ballot. Mm-hmm. They did not want that. And I'm also convinced that they weren't terribly concerned about the 63 senators too, because, people forget, but Andrew Cuomo desperately was looking for as many Republican senators as he could, even if he had to sort of take Democratic ones and turn them into Republican senators. I mean, there's a lot of corporate interests in this state, and there's a lot of, incumbency protection that's going on here. And so, and that juxtaposition between write-in candidacy to defeat India Walton and to prevent the expansion of ballot access, those are this two sides of the same coin in New York State. Across the river from New York,
the same issue in New Jersey of same-day voter registration, which again exists in a lot of places around the country, but hasn't passed in New Jersey, again, because of a Democrat there, because the state Senate, the head of the state Senate in New Jersey was opposed or had blocked or stalled the bill that the governor was pushing for same-day voter registration. Now, as you may have seen, the head of the state Senate in New Jersey lost last week, one of the Dems who lost, but that loss actually opens up room for a bunch of progressive hopes in New Jersey, because there was a lot of conflict between the head of the state Senate there and the governor won, and the head of the state Senate didn't.
All right, so let's talk about CRT and school boards and whatnot, right? I mean, so much of what we've heard out of Virginia was ostensibly about those issues, and I think there's an argument that there was a capitalization on the frustration that a lot of parents felt in terms of school shutdowns, masking, this and that. I personally think it's perfectly justified to feel frustration about it, but I still also think it was the right thing to do. COVID sucks. Being in a pandemic sucks. Having to take steps to avoid the communication of a virus sucks, but I'm not going to elect some frickin' lunatics to take over my school board because of it. Where were we on that? To the extent that there were, how many races were there where that became an issue? To the extent that we can tell, and how did they turn out?
The quantification is hard. There's so many school board elections, like hundreds and hundreds of school board elections were on the ballot last week. What was very interesting is that the right did make a major effort kind of throughout the country in places that I could list, but are not necessarily like known. They're not necessarily like big cities or places that people know around the country. And that's really where the fight was for the right. And trying to take over as many of these very, very local school boards as possible. In some places it's at the county level. In some places, a county has 25, 40 school boards. And there were a lot of money being poured in from conservative, a lot of money by the standards of school board elections, I should say. A lot of money being poured into places in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, kind of as a statewide project. In so many school board races, conservatives who supposedly were angry about critical race theory and indoctrinating children, and just in general about race and racism being addressed in these schools. And so while it's not possible to do like an overall like summary of numbers here, what is interesting, especially given how prominent that story is in terms of how we understand Virginia, is that in at least many of the places that I had made a note of prior to the election as places that were particularly high profile in places in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Connecticut, New Mexico, Colorado, Pennsylvania, the right often lost. There was no conservative wave in those offices. Definitely they progressed and snatched some seats here and there for sure, but many of the incumbents that were the most observed in the states I just mentioned won, and often not by that tight a margin. So that kind of creates a contrast, right? Where like in the places where this was the most debated, where there was an actual conservative offensive that tried to get the general public to care about critical race theory and want to stop the discussion of racism, those efforts didn't succeed. Now, that doesn't mean that wasn't actually a very good tool for the right to energize its base, drive up its own turnout even more than happened on the Democratic side, and that conversations of racism and wanting to like make a stand on that didn't help the right in higher profile races. But again, it is important because this is where the right has built its local power before at the school board level, right? In the past during the Ray Reagan era and so on. So it is important to note that these elections did happen last week as well.
Yeah, I want to put a finer point on this. The idea here is it seems to me is multifold for people who promote. The reason why you would pour money into this, if you're the conservative movement, if you're some millionaire, billionaire, whatever it is because A, when you're talking about statewide elections, you could be bringing otherwise non-voters out because they're particularly pissed about teaching kids that slavery existed in this country. And so they come out and they wouldn't otherwise come out, and they're going to vote for the other Republicans up and down the ticket, even though that they're there specifically because of a small race. And it seems to me you're also message testing a little bit if you're these organizations that are handing out this money. You're also building email lists for potential activists in the future. I mean, the value of contesting these things, and I would also imagine you're doing these a lot more often than not in states where they're going to come into play on your elections, general elections, presidential elections. What was it, 4 states where there was a margin of maybe 60, 70,000 votes, which had gone the other way. Joe Biden loses the Electoral College. I mean, it doesn't take much. If you can bring out a couple thousand new voters because they're pissed that their town in Pennsylvania, the school board wanted to have masks. That's 2,000 new voters that you've activated.
And we did actually see that last week in Pennsylvania specifically, because they had a state Supreme Court race in Pennsylvania. It was the only state Supreme Court race last week, and the GOP won by about a point only. And unlike in Virginia and New Jersey, which had obviously a very large swing, Pennsylvania's election did come down to the fact that in Philly there was much less turnout comparative to past years than in a lot of the rest of the state. And a lot of the rest of the state, Pennsylvania was probably the place where the right really put in money in those local board elections, including in the Philly suburbs. And they lost a lot of these races, not all. They lost a lot of these races, but that, as you were saying, energized a lot of voters, and that may have swung a seat for the state Supreme Court.
We should say, it just reminds me, we won a big seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I guess it was in the spring of 2020, and largely because Bernie Sanders stayed in the primary. A lot of people are saying, why is Bernie Sanders staying in the primary? Bernie Sanders does not stay in that primary in Wisconsin. That seat goes to a Republican without a doubt. And so people need to understand the strategy that exists here is very often not just about the specific seat that is being contested, but up and down the ballot and through time going forward. Daniel, this is great work. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Where can folks find you? Obviously on Twitter, and where else?
So I'm on Twitter. You mentioned that I was running the What's on the Ballot.com project. I'm also preparing work on a new project that I'm still being cryptic about, but I'm excited to tell you more about it in the coming month at some point.
All right, fantastic. For now, we'll just call it cryptic.
Yes.
Wherever.
Cryptic teaser.
But we will put a link to your Twitter account so people can follow you. As always, really great stuff. Really much appreciated.
Talk to you.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Folks, gonna head into the fun half. Yes, we are. We're going to have Nomi's going to join us.
Join in now, actually.
Oh. Just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show, you support the free show. And you not only get that, you get the fun half. And you not only get, we're just working on the mechanism to get some other bonus content. But when we, for instance, when we go for Thanksgiving, we'll probably have a day or two where we don't have a free show, but members will get probably new content. Mm-hmm.
Very
From
fancy.
where? From whence will that come? We don't know. Don't know. Not going to tell you. Join the majorityreport.com as well. And again, Majority Live, If you want to get a ticket for our insurrection at the Wilbur Theater,
January 16th.
That's right.
Oh, we had the same idea.
January 16th.
That's how you can remember it.
There you go. Nomi!
Hey, what's up?
What's happening on your show?
Well, today we have a really exciting show. We're going to be talking about movement fatigue and reassessing our strategies given the election results, given how much we lost with the infrastructure fight with Joshua Kahn Russell. He, of course, works in the movement space, works with organizations on addressing internal dynamics and movement energy. And he's going to be giving us his professional thoughts, which is a big deal. And of course, he did a lot of work over his career in the environmental movement as well. So it's going to be a really interesting show. That's tonight on rockfin.com/Nomi Key. If you are not a member of Rockfin, you can go check it out there. We also started off on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/The Nomi Key Show. And we have a full week of shows. It's crazy. If I were to go through all the guests, I think it would be too much, but we'll be tweeting it out. So fun stuff. And patreon.com/The Nomi Key Show, as usual, if you want to do audio and get special stuff.
Did we talk last week?
Yeah.
I can't even remember. Well, I guess it was Tuesday, so we didn't get the results.
No, we didn't.
Okay, because I was just mentioning with Daniel Nichanian about the abject failure of New York activists to promote the voting referendums. I mean, it's a real...
I could talk a lot about this because we wrote that initially at the Unity Reform Commission and then pushed it on the New York Democratic Party, and it was their job to implement it, and they refused to. Then they took it to the legislature, didn't have the majority then, and then it turned into this, but it was in the person... we'll talk about
it in the fun half.
Yeah.
Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
Yeah, brand new episode over at Literary Hangover, The Adventures of Colonel Daniel Boone by John Filson, 1784, goes into... It's a seminal text in the Daniel Boone mythology, where it comes actually in the second chapter of a pamphlet trying to attract settlers to Kentucky, and it's like, here's an example of how this is done, and it's going to take a lot of fighting. So that's Daniel Boone. Learn about how he first heard about Kentucky as Edenic promised land, and then left Kentucky, promised to never go back again because he was indebted and being sued all the time by people there. So patreon.com/literary hangover to support that show, but it's available on the podcast feed.
Did you have a raccoon hat?
Well, no. Famously, Daniel Boone actually didn't like to wear coonskin hats. He was more he wore different types of hats. But
what kind of
hat? Where did that myth come from?
Deerskin, but the coonskin hat comes from television.
Naturally.
Yeah.
Really?
Yep. He kind of looked down on coonskin hats. Actually.
This is part of the reason why I'm always nervous to listen to your podcast like this, because it just shatters
does violence to
myths that I've been holding on to. What does a deerskin hat look like?
I'm not sure if it is a deerskin hat, but I know that he didn't wear coonskin hats.
He didn't wear them, or he just sometimes found them uncomfortable because they were itchy?
He didn't wear them, and he looked down upon them.
Right. He looked down upon them.
Lower quality fur.
Oh. Don't tell him about the rat skin hat.
Oh, that sucks.
We're all going to be wearing them soon, guys. Don't worry. In the apocalypse.
Back to wearing animal hides?
Get comfy. Yeah, after we eat rat, we're going to take the skin. And that's Francesca Fiorentini's line. She's like, prepare for your favorite recipes for roasting rat over the fire.
Oh, jeez. What are you guys talking?
You'll be done by then, Sam. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. That's true.
Is it Femme Friday or Prepper Friday?
I'll be
both. Women are always prepare.
I'll be a distant memory at that point. Folks, gonna take a quick break, head into the fun half. You can IM the program by picking up our app at majorityapp.com. See you there. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. you're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fun half of the program, wherein we take IMs. We sometimes take calls. We'll see. Let me just take this IM, and then we'll get to Nomi, who's going to tell us about what's going on with these failed voting provisions and the sort of...
I was just going to have a Daniel Boone hat update if you wanted.
Oh, yes.
Daniel Boone hat update first.
My father, Daniel Boone, always despised raccoon fur caps and did not wear one himself. He wore instead Quaker-style beaver felt hats.
And you always referred to Daniel Boone as your father? Is that like a
North Dakota thing?
Well, that was his son, Nathan Boone. So
okay.
How do we believe Nathan?
Quoting Nathan Boone. I see. All right. I just wasn't sure if that's the way that.
Wait, so I missed it. Where did that raccoon hat come from?
It was like television, I think.
Oh.
And maybe it looks better.
It was cheaper for them to.
Probably cheaper. Probably, and maybe it was even earlier. I should maybe look that up. But like, yeah, it was.
Or is it just that you can really. A raccoon's tail is more, I think, identifiable
visually. Yeah.
I don't know. Beaver's tails. Maybe it's that one is illegal to kill and one was not at that time.
No, you could kill whatever. Daniel Boone.
Clearly, we're seeing that on TV sets. You can.
People think beavers are cute. No, but most people are fine. You know.
I wonder if it was a merchandising thing too, because as a kid you could buy those.
Yeah.
And maybe they're just like, if we do beaver, it's going to be too expensive. We do a raccoon. Oh, that's gross.
But it wasn't real when you were a kid, was it?
I think it might have been.
Ugh.
Yeah, you could probably get some real ones.
You're gonna lose your whatever your animal rights audience right now.
Well, I'm not pro killing raccoons as a for hats. Let me just
set you up for that.
Even speaking of this, really just flies in the face of my militant veganism.
Boone used to come.
Let's talk about soy milk.
Okay, hold on for 1 second.
I'm kidding.
Dayglow Lefty. Hey, Sam and MR crew, could I get a shofar for my grandmother who passed away last night after a short battle with cancer? My grandmother migrated to the U.S. from Mexico when she was a child and settled in California's Central Valley. As a kid, she worked in the fields alongside her mother and her older siblings. There she experienced the grueling conditions these field workers, mostly from Mexico, were subjected to. From not having access to clean drinking water and sanitary outhouses to crop duster pilots callously dumping pesticides onto them, all for a meager 90 cents an hour. As a teen, she became involved with the United Farm Workers Union during the Delano grape strike and boycott. This is the one with Cesar Chavez. She marched alongside Cesar Chavez. She helped establish the boycott centers that organized friendly unions, churches, community organizations to not buy grapes. She faced down violence and intimidation from Teamsters hired by the bosses to break up the picket lines, and violence from police who arrested organizers utilizing attack dogs and pepper spray. After the strike, my grandmother continued to work on behalf of vulnerable migrant field workers as a translator for immigration attorneys. The stories my grandmother told me taught me the importance of labor unions, worker rights, and the power that even the most vulnerable groups can wield when they organize and stand in solidarity against unjust labor practices. Rest in power, Grandma. Viva la huelga.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Beautiful.
That goes with something we talked about on Left Reckoning. Peter Thiel talked about that grape thing in collapsing into a...
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, we can do the shofar.
Oh, I do this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so that grape stuff is the table grapes strike is boycott is very interesting. I have this clip of Peter Thiel from 1996 before he struck it lucky with knowing the right software engineer and PayPal, but he's talking about this. He has this book out called The Diversity Myth, and he's like, "What, grapes are racist now?" And just look at the way he talks about this issue of people, like the IMer said, just pesticides dumped on them, just awful, and murder on top of just the mass sort of like poisoning, just terrible stuff. But yeah, play this Thiel clip because I think it sets up the tone for the rest of the fun half here.
Well, the question then becomes, well, what are these things really about? What is multiculturalism really about? And I will suggest to you that the single most important theme that runs through much that goes under the rubric of multicultural is that it is anti-Western. It is not non-Western. It is still focused very much on our own society, but it is primarily a vehicle for denouncing it. At Stanford University, which is the one I'm the most familiar with, but I think is certainly no exception to the rule, the debate over multiculturalism in the late 80s started with a protest. The protest was against Western culture. The notorious chant was, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture's gotta go." It was not a demand for inclusion, it was a demand for exclusion. Now, why does Western culture have to go? What is the problem with multiculturalism? And what problem does it have? The basic problem, the basic claim is the West is uniquely bad because it is racist, it is sexist, it is oppressive in a variety of other ways. And not only does it have all these problems, but it has them in a way that is far worse than other societies. That's where I think things get very, very problematic. The multicultural educator at Stanford University liked to go around saying, "I started looking for racism everywhere, and I started finding racism everywhere." And indeed, he did. If you start looking for anything everywhere, you will start finding it everywhere. If you are a feminist, and if you believe that everything that is longer than it is wide is a symbol of male oppression, then you will start finding sexism everywhere. If you want to find baseball everywhere, you can find baseball everywhere. And similarly, he could find racism everywhere. Let me just give you a couple of examples of how this process played out.
Pause it for 1 second.
There was an ongoing debate over.
It's just interesting. Like, yes, if you want to find sexism everywhere in our society, you can find it. and baseball everywhere in our society. You can find. You know what?
Not really.
You can't find baseball.
I think he just made a good point about sexism, but not so much about baseball.
No, me.
He is striking out.
Do you encounter baseball all the time in your world?
There's actually a game happening in my room right now. I don't know if you guys know.
See? I mean,
it's a figment of my imagination, but because I'm a sociopath, Peter Thiel.
I think he was actually just inadvertently made a very good point that there actually are some things that you can look for everywhere and not find it everywhere. But wait, is there more of it? Yeah, keep playing.
Yeah, he specifically talks about the grapes here.
As a symbol of male oppression, then you will start finding sexism everywhere. If you want to find baseball everywhere, you can find baseball everywhere. And similarly, he could find racism everywhere. Let me just give you a couple of examples of how this process played out. There was an ongoing debate over boycotting table grapes. The fact that table grapes were served in student residences was viewed as evidence of racism. Why? Well, because most of the grape pickers in California happened to be Latino farm workers, and they were exposed to dangerous pesticides, supposedly. Now, the fact that a grape boycott would get rid of their jobs was sort of irrelevant because, again, many of these things involve more moral posturing than real substantive concerns over these issues. There was...
Okay, and I just want to be clear. When was that from?
1996.
So in other words, a lot of this stuff is just virtue signaling, and it is absurd, and they're freely agreeing to be having pesticides poured on their head. And you've got people who are going around on college campuses looking for racism everywhere they find it, and this and that. That was 25 years ago. There is nothing new. When we hear this shit, it is nothing new. This is exactly what Corey Robin talked about with the reactionary mind. The reactionary mind of conservatives will keep bringing up these dynamics as if they are like the hip, cool, new, edgy. We've found it. I'm saying the stuff that nobody wants to talk about anytime, which is that, like, if you look for racism everywhere, you'll find it. And what's going on here is excess. And this is excess. And the diversity is problematic. And people are virtue signaling. And they just keep repackaging the same, essentially, status quo maintenance of the power dynamics in our society. And every time they just sort of like update the fashion in which it's going to be presented. It's not whatever he was referring to at a time. It's not politically correct anymore. It's now, woke culture, cancel culture. I mean, it's all the same stuff. They just regurgitate it and just rebrand this shit over and over again.
Except what's so interesting is with it, like, he's talking about systemic issues. There's no systemic racism. There's no systemic sexism. There's no systemic baseballism or whatever the hell it is. This is where his current success is making sure that belief is ingrained in the modern day system so that it's able in a society in which I'm hoping people are more aware of systemic issues than they were, say, 30 years ago, maybe not really sure. He is making sure that it's not just prevented, but it's diverted, that whatever education could potentially happen, be it in schools on a legislative level or obviously through his technological, investment, making sure that they can divert the attention back to these culture wars through a systemic way. So he's actually giving it away right there.
Yeah, he's obscuring it. And in fact, we brought this up at the beginning of the show when we were talking about Pete Buttigieg's comment on Moses building the
low tunnels,
low bridges, overpasses to keep inner city buses from going out to Jones Beach. I mean, that's the same thing, and trying to obscure the actual history and the reality at any given moment.
And Thiel and the type of lawyers he knows and the finance people he came up with, they like that those people were poisoned by those sorts of pesticides. They're fine with it. They want to obscure it. And this is 10 years after. You look at the Wrath of Grapes speech by Cesar Chavez. You read that, and I dare you to try to say that Peter Thiel has at all conveyed the message of what that struggle was about.
Yeah.
Table grapes.
How could these be racist?
How could these be racist?
How could cotton be racist?
I mean, if you want to find, he really should have worked out something else. If you want to find baseball everywhere, you'll find it everywhere. Except for when you're watching like a TV and see football.
Ted Lasso.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
And not to mention that by the way, as I apologize, I don't remember the name of the IMer, but that still occurs in through loopholes now, loopholes that Peter Thiel tries to, lobbies for in the law so that pesticides are still sprayed, maybe not in the same exact way, but they're still sprayed and they're still affecting farm workers who are not making 20 cents an hour now, a little bit more, and have a few more rights. But this is again in California. This is in California. So imagine, what's happening just south of the border or in Iowa where perhaps the laws aren't as strong.
Yep. All right. Let's turn to New York state politics. Nomi, there were 5 ballot measures, and I just want to cop to this right off the bat. Like I just didn't pay that much attention to them at all. I mean, in my capacity here, professional capacity, I just didn't. And I read up on them the day before I went in. I early voted, and I was like, well, all these are good. These are all good measures. There were 3, if I remember correctly, there was 5 ballot measures. One was to make a right of citizens in this state to have clean drinking water and clean air.
And that
essentially
passed.
That passed. There was another one that I can't remember what the second one that also passed. That was also pretty good. There were 3 other voting provisions. Well, 2 of them were voting provisions in terms of like no reason absentee ballot and early voting, and then also freezing the number of state senators. I think it was at 63. Mm-hmm. And I cannot remember what the 5th measure was, but it was also a good measure and it passed. Somebody want to look that up?
The 5th proposal changed the monetary limit on claims.
Oh, that's what it was.
City's civil court.
Not as sexy, but it allowed basically people to go in and deal with corporations with all the fees associated with going to a higher level court. So it just broadened the jurisdiction of civil claims courts. I heard nothing about these voting ballots. Mm-hmm. Nothing. And presumably, we've had a lot of complaints in this state about the voting practices of New York State, one of the bluest states in the country, being, worse than, I don't know.
It's the second worst voting system in the country.
Oh,
it was up until the Senate was lost. So lowest turnout just above Louisiana. This is not like Democratic, this is turnout in general because of a lot of the voter restrictive laws that had occurred up until the Senate. There was some early voting, for instance, didn't exist before.
Right.
So these are the types of reforms that took place under a new Democratic Senate under Cuomo. Now, obviously, the landscape has changed. Yeah, I mean, the complaint is, and I'm trying to get the language. I apologize. I didn't have the language handy. I should have done it. If someone can pull up the language, I know there's a New York Times article that shows it. Okay, so it's process. And this is the problem. Sam, it's not your fault. Process is messy. Process is not interesting. Process takes time. Process requires understanding bylaws of the New York Democratic Party and are they able to pass it or does it happen through the Senate? This is the stuff we had to deal with on the Unity Reform Commission when the Democratic Party of New York State, which let's remind everybody is Cuomo's party. This is not a party that represents all Democrats. You have Chuck Schumer didn't like Cuomo. I mean, Kirsten Gillibrand didn't like Cuomo. And they were siding with the anti-IDC movement, which of course, pretty much most Democrats to the left of Cuomo were for, and progressives, of course. But the difference is that during the Unity Reform Commission, we put forward a bunch of measures to improve voter access across the board, but it was very much directed at New York State. And we had the head of the Board of Elections, one of the heads of the Board of Elections, the lawyer for it, come in, who was appointed by Cuomo, by the way, but he's a lawyer and he has a responsibility. And he basically admitted, the Democratic Party can just change this rule. This doesn't have to go through the legislature. And the Democratic Party kept punting and saying, no, the legislature needs to do it. And it's their fault, hence the IDC. So the party itself is not democratic. The people are essentially appointed. They don't announce their process ahead of time, yada, yada, yada. And then also the money, nobody nobody knows where the money goes. Well, we saw with India Walton, a lot of that money went to partner up with Republicans in defeating India Walton against the previous Democratic Party chair, who is responsible for not passing these things, Byron Brown. So now, after the election, you have this guy, Jay Jacobs, who's the head of the Democratic Party. He is a county executive or a leader in Long Island, and Long Island was wrecked. Like, Democrats lost across the board. There's absolutely no representation in Long Island anymore by Democrats. And that is, I will say it, his fault, because he, as Democratic Party chair, was so preoccupied with defeating India Walton and having, which, again, let me just remind folks, Buffalo is not controlled. It is a county legislature. Like, the mayor does not have that much power. So this was all very symbolic. It wasn't about like, she's going to transform the city. She still had to deal with the county, the common council and the county legislature and the county executive, all who have more power than she would have, or Byron Brown has. This was symbolic. This was about defeating the socialists, not giving them any more movement, while they're not spending any money on keeping their existing Democrats in office, existing Democrats who are not even like the left Democrats from downstate. These are like center Cuomo-like Democrats who lost. So why does this matter? Simultaneously, and this is really unpopular, but this is the weeds. When we were on the Unity Reform Commission, we could not get some of these these measures support from progressive organizations who rely on having a ballot line. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So their entire brand is on keeping their, like, oh, well, if the Democrats aren't going to do anything, then we'll do something. So come and join our movement.
Well, are you talking about the Working Families Party?
I'm just saying anybody, any organization that has a ballot line. So it was very frustrating for us because, you know, this is voting rights. This is civil rights. This is civil rights.
Just to be clear, you're saying that it's that parties to the left of Democrats get value out of Democrats not doing certain reforms because it makes their ballot line more viable, because it gives you a reason to vote for them.
Yep.
I mean, this is, this should be a fairly obvious dynamic to people on some.
I think it is, but nobody says it. But they all say it behind the scenes, though.
And you should, and it. The other answer is to push that party to the left. I mean, if the Democrats take a step to the left, everybody else should be taking a step to the left. That's the way that it should be working. And there's also, I think, a difference between, like, why are we going to expend money on, reformist policies by Democrats when we have other places that we want to expend our money on? That, to me, makes some sense. Others, but you start getting into murkier territory when you're like, we want to prevent this from passing so that we maintain our, but Democrats do this with Republicans too.
Of course, but this is not about the Democratic Party reform. Let me make this very clear. There's nothing about those ballot items that was about reforming the Democratic Party. They previously and actually currently have the power to change those rules internally, at least for their primaries only. Let me make that very clear, for primaries only. This was about voting rights. And if you don't have every single organization to the left of the Republicans supporting basic fundamental voting rights that exist in states like Arizona, then what kind of party are you? And internally, I know that there are state senators and people who we would never partner with on anything that are extremely furious that this party, and I think this is the last time this kind of dynamic is going to exist, because Jay Jacobs, multiple people have called for him to resign because of this and comments towards India Walton and obviously what happened with India Walton. But also, he lost Long Island. And like, if you can't deliver your own neighborhood because your eyes are on, they didn't spend any money on it. It's not like, oh, it was because of the Long Island has a lot of Trumpian Republicans, but you also didn't spend any money there, just like the national dynamic. You didn't care. You were more focused on defeating a socialist, woman of color, union organizer than you were keeping anyone. And that's going to offend a lot of lawmakers who may not necessarily side with progressives, but feel like the Democratic Party does not have their back. and they're going to get angry and feel alienated. And my guess is, based on this last conference that I went to last week on New York politics, there's going to be somebody challenging Jay Jacobs, and there's going to be an internal call for him to step down and major reforms, because this is civil rights. This is not progressive.
So in many respects, what we're still seeing is the flushing out of the system, the Cuomoites, and also still sort of the wake of the flushing of the IDC, right? I mean, all this stuff has yet to sort of like exit the body politic yet, right? I mean, we have some sweating and some defecating and urinating and
conditioning. There's conditioning by people. You know, I think that there are progressive organizations out there who mean well and fought against the IDC and did incredible work on the ground. But there's this conditioning that it's like impossible for them to work with normie Democrats to fight for, so nobody puts any money in. And the result is, how many millions of people are not voting that could be voting? And spoiler alert, they're from poor communities.
I mean, on some level, I think it's not surprising that there has been an ossification of a lot of these organizations, because you had a dynamic that seemed impenetrable for a long time. And all of a sudden, Andrew Cuomo is gone, and you've built up your entire organization and the culture of your organization and the mentality of your organization based upon a reality that is fundamentally altered. I mean, I don't think we're going to get in this state a politician like that, maybe ever again. One who's going to have that type of like iron grip across the state, up and down state, transactional with unions. I think we're entering a much better era of democratic politics in New York State, hopefully, and it's going to give a lot more opportunity for some progressive, I think, policy and changes. That's my hope, anyways.
I mean, we can only hope. And I think public pressure, so if you're able to speak out and say, Democratic Party, you do not believe in civil rights, do not, you're completely abandoning your most basic principles. It was one thing when Cuomo was there to blame the IDC, but he only got away with it because he was able to blame the IDC. Now there's no IDC. The buck stops at Jay Jacobs, and it's not a great look. He doesn't have a foil.
Right. And they should be able to pass this, and they can pass a lot of this stuff in the legislature. Is that right? You don't need a referendum to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. The session's going to start after the new year, and we'll see. Also keep in mind that there's a tectonic shift happening. There are a lot of people who are running for office now next cycle because of the opening of the governor. It shifts people out. There's, I don't know, like 10 people running for attorney general now. Most of them are existing lawmakers of some sort. The gubernatorial race is heating up already. And then you're going to have a lot of folks in the Senate feel like they can vie for leadership now too, if there's a shift at the top there. So I think people are going to be really, pitching reforms. And that's the time to get them to do this, because the campaigning is going to happen simultaneously while the session's going on. It's not like, when I'm elected and then they can abandon their principles. They can do it while they're running.
Let's move on to a clip of Tucker Carlson.
Oh, yay.
Since we are sort of New York adjacent here, we played the clip earlier of Pete Buttigieg using as an example of how literally infrastructure can be racist. If you spend 30 seconds thinking about it, you could probably come up with an example on your own if you have been
in your community.
Yeah. I mean, just like wonder where's the town dump? Ask yourself, where's the town dump? Where's the big electrical, thing with all the
where do you see the smokestack?
Yeah, where are the smokestacks?
Where are the plants?
I mean, all of that. Just think about it and say like, hey, why is it there as opposed to over in that nice neighborhood? Most people know this. Some people are a little bit ignorant about the history. Here's a guy who's absolutely not ignorant about this history. He is a charlatan who is willing to use racism and bigotry to make money and to espouse fake history. And I give you Tucker Carlson.
Racism into a road. Roads are made of sand and gravel and asphalt. Ask any road builder. Roads cannot be racist any more than toasters or sectional couches can be racist. They are inanimate objects. They're not alive. That seems obvious, but apparently Pete Buttigieg didn't know it. Or maybe he did know it, but he was afraid to say it. In any case, here's how he responded.
I'm still surprised that some people were surprised when I pointed to the fact that if a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or it would have been, in New York was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices.
Here we have news. According to the Department of Transportation, the Secretary, overpasses in New York were designed to keep buses of black and Puerto Rican kids from getting to the beach. And yet here's the amazing part. Those very same overpasses somehow allow buses full of white kids to get through. That sounds like magic. How does it work? Well, it's possible the overpasses that Buttigieg referred to are actually drawbridges manned by vigilant bigots with binoculars. Here comes the Puerto Rican bus. Lower the overpass. You may laugh, but in a systemically racist country, it's entirely possible. Or maybe come to think of it, the problem is the buses themselves. In New York, children of color are being herded into a...
I mean, just put up the clip. Put up the clip right now, just so that the morons. There's going to be
screenshot.
Yeah, the screenshot of Robert Moses's. We
can read it again.
The book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's read it again in the middle of this.
Now he began to limit access by buses.
Should we just say this is Caro's book on Robert Moses.
The Power Broker.
Robert Moses was a New York, maybe bureaucrat, you would call him.
Yeah, head bureaucrat of transportation.
Yeah, of transportation, a huge racist, and designed things in these ways because there weren't massive buses of white kids coming out to Jones Beach because most of the white people lived closer to the beach.
Yeah. He had restricted the use of state parks by poor and lower middle class families in the first place by limiting access to the parks by rapid transit. He had vetoed the Long Island Railroad's proposed construction of a branch spur to Jones Beach for this reason. Now he began to limit access by buses. He instructed Shapiro to build the bridge across his new parkways too low for buses to pass. Bus trips therefore had to be made on local roads, making the trips discouragingly long and arduous. For Negroes whom he considered inherently dirty, there were further measures. Buses needed permits to enter state parks. Buses chartered by Negro groups found it very difficult to obtain permits. I don't know if is that the
permits aren't racist. Permits aren't racist. Everybody knows permits aren't racist. How is that possible? It's an inanimate object.
Tucker wants his audience to believe that these divisions are ordered in a way that make sense biologically. That's what he wants to say by obscuring that history.
I'm curious if he is aware of redlining and if he would defend redlining, because this is a loophole of redlining.
Of course, he's aware of all of this. Continue to play. He is a liar.
Wait, not to mention, before we just backstory for this real quick, Moses is also responsible for public housing and part of the redlining that occurred in most of the redlining that occurred in New York City.
Yeah, this is the guy we trusted with public housing, in case you want to draw any examples from that.
Again, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, the same guy that made sure that the public pools that white people had access to that were in whiter areas were significantly warmer and the black pools a little bit colder so that they wouldn't be using the public facilities that he divinely created.
So you're saying temperature is racist?
Yeah.
Temperature is racist. How is that possible? We all know that's not the case. Here, good, continue.
Here we have news. According to the Department of Transportation, the Secretary, overpasses in New York were designed to keep buses of black and Puerto Rican kids from getting to the beach. And yet here's the amazing part. Those very same overpasses somehow allow buses full of white kids to get through. That sounds like magic. How does it work? Well, it's possible the overpasses that Buttigieg referred to are actually drawbridges manned by vigilant bigots with binoculars. Here comes the Puerto Rican bus. Lower the overpass. You may laugh, but in a systemically racist country, it's entirely possible. Or maybe come to think of it, the problem is the buses themselves. In New York, children of color are being herded into unusually tall buses, like those top-heavy double-deckers they used to have in London that the Beatles sang about, just to prevent them from reaching the ocean. You can't get to the beach in a bus like that. And we don't know exactly what's happening here, but we agree with Pete Buttigieg 100% that it's morally wrong. It's not who we are. So thank heaven he's got $1 trillion to get to the bottom of the racist road problem in this nation.
You also have
That's it for us.
You have a production team that could just Google Robert Moses.
Oh,
and
he knows all this.
I know, but like yeah.
He knows all this.
He studied Robert Moses.
He knows it all. In 1986, or when he went to Trinity, this was a signed reading. He knows this.
He loves it.
He knows it.
Just 2 minutes riffing on bullshit.
He knows it.
And his project is to uphold these divisions, and again, I'm going to use this word for the millionth time, naturalize them. And so he purposefully pretends like, oh, this is just common sense, in order to make sure that these systems continue in the way that, I mean, he laughs at what even is a white supremacist. It's the same thing that he does there. He wants to hide how these things look so that these things continue.
It's really impressive. It's really impressive.
Robert Caro responded?
How dark. Didn't Caro die recently?
No, he didn't die. Oh my gosh, no.
I don't know if he has, but I think like some historical society put out some like on Instagram, like his actual tally marks when he was counting up who was coming to which beach and how absolutely racialized it was. And yeah.
For context, this is the same Robert Caro who wrote the LBJ series and has one still he's working on, and just does so much research. It's like
one of the all-time greats. Yeah.
Really.
Dan from Columbus. Majority Report should crowdfund a scholarship for a member to go to Barry Weiss's new university. See how long it takes a student to get kicked out for constantly talking about Palestine.
It's tough because that costs about as much as it costs to get into the dinner with what's his name from Ohio and Peter Thiel, JD Vance.
JD Vance. Observer. Wednesday, Tuesday, what day? Ford's Day, 5 day, Slacker Day, it's Fun Day. That was from the opening. Pink Lady, can we not forget that Nancy Pelosi said, I knew there were no weapons in mass destruction, and add that to your lest we forget Jim Jordan atrocity corner? Sure. Train Boy, here's how racist Robert Moses was. All of his New York City playgrounds are beautiful works, each decorated to gel with the neighborhood. There's a playground in Brooklyn by the beach that is all aquatic in design. The one near Central Park Zoo has all sorts of animals. When he finally got around to making his only playground in Harlem, one of 137, the design motif he chose to use, monkeys. He was also uncircumcised. Ooh.
Okay. I don't know what that last part has to do with anything.
I don't
Thanks
know.
for the fun fact.
I also wonder how Train Boy was aware of that.
Train Boy just
read the book.
Do we have Prager's? And since we're talking about people, let's do this. Do we have to play the first minute of what Prager's saying? Because it's sort of not relevant. But let's just go into it. So here's Dennis Prager. He's on Newsmax. They are ostensibly responding to Jennifer Granholm, who's the energy secretary, to supposedly laughing off concerns about rising gas prices. Prager is on a rant talking about destroying the energy independence of the United States. I know a great way in which the country can become energy independent, and that is to build wind farms all across the eastern seaboard, which apparently we're doing anyways, and to develop more sustainable energy so that we are truly energy independent. But be that as it may, he goes on to say that historians are going to look back at this era in part for the way that we treat the unvaccinated. Here is Dennis Prager coming up with a pretty stunning claim about how people with AIDS were treated back in the day.
Talk about rewriting history.
Of global warming, an idiotic, irrational, sick fear of extinction of the biosphere. I mean, do you understand the nonsense that we live with? It's if we survive this as a free country, historians will just ask, how did this happen? How did people get governed by irrational fears? Whether it is of the non-vaccinated who are the pariahs of America, as I have not seen in my lifetime any pariah group like this. During the AIDS crisis, can you imagine if gay men and intravenous drug users, who were the vast majority of people with AIDS, had they been pariahs the way the non-vaccinated are? But it would have been inconceivable, and it should have been inconceivable. They should not have been made pariahs. But this is kosher. This is okay. You can make the non-vaccinated. So it's a different America.
This is disgusting. They were absolutely made pariahs.
Oh my God.
They were absolutely made pariahs. AIDS first came onto the scene, I think, in 81. Reagan didn't mention it for 4 years because it was widely considered by the conservative administration and Republicans in power to be something that affected gay people and black people. And they didn't want to deal with it, and they were fine with it ravaging those communities. During that time, I found this article in the New York Times. 1986, violence against homosexuals rising, groups seeking wider protection say. So there were reports of increased violence against homosexuals because of against gay people, LGBTQ people, homosexuals, it was said at the time, used in that way, because of this rhetoric and because they were aggressively stigmatized. The conservatives at the time, the evangelical leaders at the time, were saying that this was a plague brought upon gay people and that they deserved it because of their sin. It's a lot more stigmatizing than anything he's referencing here.
Also from the New York Times, March 18th, 1986, William F. Buckley's op-ed in the New York Times editorial page entitled "Critical Steps in Combating the AIDS Epidemic" includes this paragraph: "Everyone detected with AIDS should be tattooed in the upper forearm to protect common needle users and on the buttocks to prevent victimization of other homosexuals." So, yeah.
And this is in the New York Times.
Put up the thing that Cruz tweeted. I mean, you don't even need to go to other parties about this. First off, gay people were, in some instances, there was attempts to arrest them for having sex. There was talks about like literally treating them like lepers. Put up that tweet that I just put in there. This is what Prager himself wrote in a town hall column in 2008. 25, 30 years almost afterwards. Do we have it up? Even the natural sciences are increasingly subject to being rendered as a means to a progressive end. There was the pseudo threat of heterosexual AIDS in America, science manipulated in order to destigmatize AIDS. So he is complaining about the science that was involved in researching AIDS because he didn't like the fact that it was actually destigmatizing AIDS as primarily a gay man's disease and increased funding for AIDS research. He's conceding there was a stigma there that was inhibiting research for this disease that was killing tens of thousands of people.
It's almost like he's using the same tactics there as they're using.
Oh, that's exactly it.
It's the theme of the day.
It's the theme of the day. We pretend that we don't know history so we can, again, it's the reactionary mind. We're going to reintroduce the exact same existing oppressive dynamics, but we're going to repackage it as if it's something that is new and really a fight for liberation.
And the New York Times is going to publish it. And
people wouldn't even touch people with AIDS. I mean, stories from my uncle who passed away from AIDS. Nurses, doctors wouldn't touch him. I mean, it was a big deal when Princess Diana hugged that HIV positive child back in the days. That was, I mean, the guy, I mean, this is just as reprehensible as it gets, in my opinion, because one, you're changing history to, and it pairs with how they're changing history to say that what they're experiencing is the same as what the Jews experienced in the Holocaust. Like, you are whitewashing and papering over these incredibly instructive moments in our history about how we treated certain groups of people that we need to learn from, and that conservatives like himself were directly involved in that project and complicit in it. And so I Anyway, that really pissed me off.
It's all like that's why Trump derangement syndrome was such a useful thing. Like, it's just you're upset about something and you're imagining it, right? And yeah.
But I think the issue is because they're so powerful, and because on the left, the moneyed interests on the left do nothing to stop it or carry their own narrative, we're forced into reacting and responding to it, because if we don't, they just, there's no response. You have to have a rapid response. So, I mean, this is why it's so important. I think why everybody's up in arms about Democrats like not leading with a message, because they just repeat the same message over and over. And here we are every day just defending it and attacking them and fact checking them when, we have our own power right now. We could be shifting the message or investigating. I mean, why hasn't anybody investigated Prager University just to start off with? Like, how much power there is in going into their finances the way that they do to us in every single left institution. You want to stop them from doing this, you have to play hardball, because they just keep doing it over and over. It's the Christian Coalition in the 80s. It's Prager University now.
Yep. And
we should say that nobody's really brought up the fact that that Barry Weitz's university is really coming for PragerU.
Are they a nonprofit? I'm very curious if she got nonprofit status.
They're working on that.
Yes.
That interesting.
Way to hide some money, make some money, huh?
They're working on it. Let's go to some IMs here. Mind Pillow guy. Say, Sam, do you think we could get Jim Brewer to open for the live show in Boston? I see he's got a hilarious new Type 5. Yeah, I watched that.
Man, what happened to him?
I mean, nothing.
I just remember the guy that said itty bitty titty in Half Baked.
Yeah, no, he's not really any different. He's just as dumb. It's just that he's got somebody breathed some new life into his career because he got like an anti-vax, anti-mask. That's all that it was. District Jabroni. As someone who majored in history, it's sad. And I would say the same amount of like drugs that you take, if you take the same amount for the, let's say, I don't know, the 10 years of your adulthood or would-be adulthood if you're, let's say, 28 years old, and then you take the same amount of drugs for the next 10 years, and then you take the same amount of drugs for the next 10 years, when you start to get around 50 and you've been taking that level of drugs the entire time, you start to see a little wear and tear. I'll tell you that right now.
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about...
I thought you were trying to be obtuse.
No, I'm not talking... I'm not being obtuse at all. I was literally talking about Brewer.
Okay.
District Jabroni.
Clear that up.
As someone who majored in history, it's sad to see the stated discussion around it. People misunderstand what revisionist history is. It's not when you go back and write a history using, for example, the lens of how a certain time period or event was experienced by black people. Revisionist history is what Prager is doing in regards to his aid statement. It's willfully ignoring sources from the time to make an ideological point. Laura, I was really interested in the interview regarding 4-day work week. However, I felt this needs to be part of the political commitment to retraining and adult education for industries that can't reduce working hours, such as education and healthcare. There also needs to be a commitment to economic dignity and fair wages. A post-COVID world needs to be fair to everyone. Yes, I think that's true. Rand Paul's neighbor just bought my tickets for the show today, flying out of Seattle. I look forward to trying your subpar apples. I'll give you one of these.
Wow.
Fierce deity, as always, important to remind at this time that Fenway Park is right there in the city, and most people take public transport to go there. Go Sox.
That and the Chicago Cubs Stadium, I think, are good in that way.
Vote for me for school board. Teachers are teaching your children to hate the designated hitter. We need to fight against CBT. Graveland, Dr. Rogan, according to Rogers, Rogan is just Gwyneth Paltrow for men. Oh, that's a good.
Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar absolutely ethered Rogers too, in I'm not sure what publication.
He doesn't miss even at this stage of his life.
Red, white, and blue, Madge. Red, white, and blue, Madge. Conservatives are completely incapable of having a good faith conversation and moving past the current trappings of systemic racism. It's in the name. Conservatives maintain the status quo, justify it any way you have to. Racist retcons like the Lost Cause are a perfect example of this. Beneath the 101 on the 5, the big live. Oh, that's good. I like that. If you look for indigenous people in America, you can find it ever. Oh, well, maybe not. Inconceivable Princess Bride dude voice. Attorney Andrew, Democratic congresspersons and senators are obsessed with process arguments. Sheldon Whitehouse was just on the 5-4 podcast where he gave his basic critiques of the Supreme Court. Each argument danced around the real issue. Conservative judges are bad because their decisions have terrible consequences. Instead, he argued against dark money funding briefs that, quote, signal to the court how to decide. An effing ghoul like Alito doesn't need anyone to tell him how to decide, and Dems need to say that. The worst part is that Whitehouse is the leftmost camp on how we reform the court. We are effed. Yes, I agree with this. Glass-Steagall, I have a sports analogy from Madison Cawthorn's idea that the election was illegitimate because legislatures changed the rules. It's like a debate about moving the three-point line and then losing the side after the season is over wants all the records expunged because they still think they were right. Fraud would be like steroids, which you're
too much effort on Madison Cawthorn.
Yeah, but it's also the metaphor is more complicated than the actual reality.
Yeah.
The rules were in place before they voted. It's fine.
I don't want to spend a second on Madison Cawthorn anymore. Like, I don't care about this guy. No. He's such a creation. It's ridiculous, and he's so thirsty for attention.
Nude couch sitter. I received and installed my Hello Tushy butt squirter, and I have never felt so much like looking down on the dirty butt people in my life. I'm glad to hear that. Great. Big Frank. Frankie C. Even though today is my birthday, I would like a shofar for the birthdays of Hedy Lamarr, Carl Sagan, and Sherrod Brown. It's their birthdays, too. And they did more than I for the humans. All right, we'll give you one of those. Although, don't sell yourself short. That's you asked for the shofar. They never did.
Sherrod Brown?
I swallow. What up, MR crew? Hey, Sam, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the film Dune, which I know you've seen. I liked it.
You didn't see it in theaters, so maybe you would have loved it if you saw it in theaters.
I would have loved it had I seen it in theater. I'll watch it again.
It's very immersive in theaters, and maybe I'm like a dork, but I'm easy to please with some of that stuff. I love Denis Villeneuve, and I loved Arrival, and I love a lot of his work visually. I think he does a lot, and I'm not always dazzled by visuals, but I think it was really amazing.
Stinky, YouTube chat is effing annoying. Maybe that infertile freak had a point. This show is so much better than its audience. Well, I don't know about that. I mean,
no, it may be better than the YouTube chat, but there are trolls in the YouTube chat. The audience is pretty awesome.
Be specific about your criticisms.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is a good point. Zephi, Pittsburgh often gets forgotten in these discussions. I think you mentioned that we elected our first black mayor this cycle, but I don't think you mentioned him being a progressive. He was recently on local radio and asked about police funding, and he said he feels there's money on the police budget to direct to other places. This is on top of a big county election for judges and county council. Put more progressives on the bench in the legislature. In the latest series of wins by progressives in this area, when looking to continue into next year, when among other races, Socialist State Rep Summer Lee will be running for Congress to take Mike Doyle's seat. He's retiring. You should check out her launch video on her Twitter page. Should mention also about the statewide races. A bunch of Republican judges were up for re-election, and despite efforts to gin up the GOP base, Democrats scored one victory on the Commonwealth Court. We need more turnout in Philadelphia to win statewide. Indeed. That's what they say about Pennsylvania. So Josh Hawley gave us a speech.
Interview.
No. He gave a speech. At the, the Conservative Conference in Orlando. In fact, he was the keynote speaker. And what he said was so bat crap crazy that that Axios show was like, oh, can we get him to say it on our thing?
Oh,
so that we can make some hay out of this? I have a copy of the speech here somewhere. It gives you a sense of where Hawley is going. He is trying to appeal to the theocratic evangelical heart of the Republican Party. He is also trying to capture the imagination of the aggrieved white man. And he's trying to do it as if he has a populist economic message. This is how he's setting himself up for his 2024 run. I think it probably is, maybe 2028, but here he is.
Senator, you gave a pretty hot speech at the National Conservatism Conference in Orlando. You talked about the left's attack on men.
Pause it for 1 second.
Oh, a hot speech. Ooh.
Yeah. But understand, like, let's be clear on what this is. And I mean, I think everybody knows it, but this is really even just more egregious than usually, these interviews. This is all like, all these questions are pre-negotiated. Like, they know exactly. We're going to bring you on. We're going to talk about your speech. We're just going to set it up. It's going to tee you up. And, we'll ask some questions that explore. That's all. You're great. You're great. That speech was so hot.
Yes, spicy speech.
You were just so hot. It was like, people are talking about it. It's great. And we're going to get it out there more. All right?
Hawley's so hot right now.
He's
so hot right now.
Honestly, nobody's talking about anything but that speech, Senator. Really good stuff. Okay, you ready? All right, let's start it over.
Senator, you gave a pretty hot speech at the National Conservatism Conference in Orlando. You talked about the left's attack on men of America.
Yeah.
Why masculinity as your new big issue?
Well, I think what the left is doing is attacking America. They're saying that America is systemically oppressive and men are systemically responsible.
What's a man to you? Paint a picture.
What's a man? Well, a man is a father.
How is that
the follow-up? How is that the follow-up?
Well, because you got to get the terms down. Okay, so they're attacking masculinity. Well, they're attacking masculinity because they're saying America is oppressive, and when they're saying that, they're saying men are oppressive. Now, did he say white man? Because that's what he's talking about.
At the beginning, he said white men. I'm the Mike from Axios.
Pull it back a little bit.
Of America.
Yeah.
Why masculinity as your new big issue?
Well, I think what the left is doing is attacking America. They're saying that America is systemically oppressive and men are systemically responsible.
What's a man to you? Paint a picture.
What's a man? Well, a man is a father, a man is a husband, a man is somebody who takes responsibility. As conservatives, we've got to call men back to responsibility. We've got to say that spending your time not working, and we have more and more men who are not working, spending your time on video games, spending your time watching porn online while doing nothing is not good for you, your family, or this country.
So a viewer's watching this and they're thinking, really? What the liberals are doing are going to push me to watch Pornhub more or play Donkey Kong more? Do you mean that literally?
Well, what I mean literally is that I think the liberal attack, the left-wing attack on manhood says to men, you're part of the problem. It says that your masculinity is inherently problematic. It's inherently oppressive.
What's your basis for linking that to what liberals or the left, as you would say, do? Is that based on data or based on a hunch?
Well, it's policy over many years. I mean, if you look at the policy of deindustrialization, those are policy choices Mike pursued over many years.
Wait, how does that connect to porn?
Oh, well, you've got.
Hold on, pause it for 1 second. That's not the question. How does that connect to the left?
Deindustrialization is a feminist cause against men.
You know what this is, though? He mentions it because he can't really say that he wants American masculinity and white masculinity, which he's trying to appeal to be intrinsically linked to capitalism and your ability to bring home the bacon. I mean,
That's exactly what it is.
Oh yeah, that's the religious. That's the way that God meant it.
Yeah,
men need to be working more, fewer women working.
They need to be doing man stuff like golfing and going to pageants and eating fast food.
And here is where we learn that porn did not exist until there was deindustrialization.
Yeah,
you go back.
It's pretty gay to be watching porn, I guess.
Well, if it's gay.
Problematic. It's
no, but saying woman porn.
Your masculinity is inherently problematic. It's inherently oppressive.
What's your basis for linking that to what liberals or the left, as you would say, do? Is that based on data or based on a hunch?
Well, it's policy over many years. I mean, if you look at the policy of deindustrialization, those are policy choices Mike pursued over many years.
Wait, how does that connect to porn?
Oh, well, you've got men, 16 million men, Mike, who are idle, who don't have anything to do. Now, partly that's their own responsibility, but also partly it's because jobs have dried up in many cities across America and rural areas too. I think you put together lack of jobs, you put together fatherlessness, you put together the social messages that we teach our kids in school. I think we've got to confront that and its effects.
This is not going to go well for him. Yeah. Because, you want white men? Don't go after the porn, you idiot.
or video games in general.
This is his attempt to pull back on the high bandwidth internet that is going to cities and towns.
That's why you didn't support infrastructure.
You need to eliminate the broadband. Because that's what's happening. These guys are losing their jobs. They're getting broadband and they're watching Pornhub all day.
I can't wait to see Peter Thiel go to war with Josh Hawley. Can't wait. This is going to be an amazing, you want to see this culture war? That's the culture war I'm looking forward to in a couple of years.
It would be funny to run as a Republican and be like, all your issues are making it so people can watch porn in public places and stuff like that.
There is going to be a moment in 2024 during the primary where Hawley and Cruz face off about porn, and Hawley's going to bring up him liking that porn. They're at the bottom of the barrel for the evangelical voters, and they're just fighting to the death.
All kidding aside, this is what a Josh Hawley is doing right now. He is going to the plan that he has obviously is something to the effect of I need to shore up the evangelical base. And so I'm going to be talking about things like porn and idleness and the devil's play things and et cetera, which is just, I mean, it's the same thing that he could have said 30 years ago or 50 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And then he's going to pivot to this deindustrialization as he locks up. And so that when he talks about deindustrialization, his evangelical support is going to hear he's against porno. And that's how this works. What I find interesting
about him is he's sort of this cross section between evangelical base or even a Christian coalition from the 80s base, the two of them, and the IDW. I don't think one transfers over to the other. I don't think that the nerds on the internet who hate women and watch Jordan Peterson online are gonna be in the same group as he is, but you never know.
Oh, I don't know about that because the masculinity is just an attack on women. And this isn't...
Tell me more about that, Sam.
Well, but this isn't the IDW thing. This is Rush Limbaugh talking about the feminized...
No. The deindustrialization does not speak to evangelical.
Oh, no. That's my point, though. It will be coded language. It will resonate, but he is shoring up his religious base first. And then he starts to pivot to the deindustrialization, where he's gotten some talk about anti-monopoly and anti-big tech and that stuff.
He's trying to have it two ways. He's trying to have the evangelical base, and he's trying to tap into what Trump was able to tap into, which are those online young men that Bannon was able to identify given his past work in the video game industry. If you read Devil's Bargain on this very topic, and he just really quickly, what he wants to be able to do is say, I don't know where he gets that 16 million men figure, but he wants men who feel disaffected from society, men who may be lonely, men who may be playing video games because they aren't able to contribute and live up to this ideal of masculinity that people like Hawley is setting up for him in a capitalist society, or who may be having a dependency on porn. It's the symptoms of our fucked up society that need to be blamed. So blame them and I will alleviate that. And then finally, if you are able to elect me, I'll solve it. And you'll be able to exist in this society that is inherently rigged against you.
But that would require, and I completely agree with you, Emma, that's a strategy, but I think that would require men who are in those spaces to be able to self-diagnose themselves. Most people who are addicted to porn don't recognize that this is problem or not problem, that it's a symptom of some sort of societal insecurity that exists and is strengthened because or conditioned by toxic masculinity. That's not something that like they just wake up one day and realize. I think he's really going to struggle with this. It's hard to pivot from evangelical into this space where it's just the opposite, beliefs. I don't know. I mean, the reason why Trump was good at that was because if you have to convince the evangelicals last, that's easier than convincing the evangelicals first and then bringing in the rest. Donald Trump was a misogynist, he was a rapist, he was a philanderer, he was, the worst toxic masculine, but he embodied that. No one looks at Josh Hawley and is like, well, this guy picks up a lot of girls. He's not.
No, I agree. I just think I agree with you. I just think I think it's the strategy. And I think that there's going to be a lot of conservatives who mislead people who are feeling the effects of isolation and atomization in our society and push them towards toxic areas. And I don't have a ton of, sympathy for it, but at the same time, this is a real constituency. And, that's what
I think you're right. But one more thing, just keep in mind, like, I'm not, I could be wrong and play this clip in 4 years or 8 years or whatever it is. There's a reason why these autocrat dictator types are macho. There's a reason for that. There's a strength. I feel secure with them, whether I even consciously recognize what that is and where that comes from. It's mythical. And I think that the Democrats and progressives or whoever, we have to really think about what it means to deconstruct that mythology that is so deeply ingrained in us and how we counter that with our own form of mythology. And I think, Obama in 2008 was very good at that, whether it was conscious or not.
Good point.
Let's go to the
Good point, Emma. Teamwork. Watch out, Josh Hawley.
Yeah.
It's always snowy in Ottawa. Watched the whole Sean video last night, and it's damning in two ways. Probably the best breakdown of how anti-vax grifting works because of how in-depth it goes on the I'm just asking question nonsense. Number two, it's damning of larger media institutions because of how well it distills complex medical issues to common speak. Shows that it's very possible to answer the genuine questions people may have of COVID-related research if you actually take the time to inform your audience. Like, imagine if Sanjay Gupta, when he went on Rogan, was this prepared and willing to sort out the muck. Yeah, no, absolutely. Michael Tracy's delightful girlfriend. Is the discussion of movement fatigue sponsored by Hello Tushy? Doodles.
I don't know. Maybe we should hang on a second. Give me a second. Hey, hello, Tushy.
Yeah, maybe.
Holla at you, girl.
New opportunity.
Tucker lying about the racist intent of civil infrastructure and Prager lying about the AIDS epidemic was remarked on by A.R. Moxon, who said fascists lie because they know they're unlikely to be challenged, and they know it's menacing for people of good faith to watch liars tell lies unchallenged.
Also, they know that the revisionist history is tantalizing for a certain group of people. People would rather believe that than believe that everything in our society is touched by racism, which it is.
I like that show horse comment though, as just a demonstration of power. Basically, look at what you can do, the type of racist flips you can perform, and no one's going to check you. I think that's an important point.
This guy, Jay Chivone. Let's just do this, shall we? You want to come in with this pendant?
This is the world's first reusable cotton swab.
Hold on. Wait a second.
It removes up to 5 times more excess ear.
That's not what I want.
Reusable cotton swab.
Sam's 90 tabs.
Yeah,
open.
Sam.
Yeah. Here.
I'm hooked.
Get ready to put this up here. Put up that video when I say, please. Jay Chivone, whoever thought Daniel Boone wore a coonskin hat? That it was Disney's Davy Crockett who started the craze, says the ever-confident Jay Chivone. Play the video, please, if you will, Bradley.
Daniel Boone was a man, yes, a big man. With an eye like an eagle and as tall as a mountain was he.
All right, put the sound
Josh
down.
Hawley, look out.
Yeah. Well, what's he wearing there?
A raccoon hat?
He appears to be wearing a raccoon skin hat.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Was that before? I think he's trying to say is one came before the other, not that it was one or the other.
You know, he said, whoever thought Daniel Boone wore a coonskin hat? It was Disney's Davy Crockett who started the craze. Well, that may be the case, but the fact is Daniel Boone wore a coonskin hat. At least at that show.
Actually, it might be because people associated with the kind of mixing the Davy Crockett mythology with
without a doubt. But I mean, it's not like I'm, talking out.
Yeah, don't gaslight Sam about.
Give me a break.
But this brings up a great point. Josh Hawley could win with that hat.
There you go.
Is this me, Roden? I just wanted to read this one before it got lost. Hawley going for the Travis Bickle caucus. That was pretty funny.
Jay Chavon, Moses was in charge of the Triborough Bridge Authority. It was a fiefdom that somehow put him outside the control of the city and provided him a steady stream of revenue to carry out his ambitions. Illuminati kids. I've seen some coverage of the satanic conspiracy reaction of the Travis Scott concert. Despite growing up in an escapably Christian environment, somehow I'm always taken by surprise at how many Americans believe Satan exists.
Yeah.
It's a real being in a non-metaphorical way. I was wondering how serious you guys view that as a factor when it comes to how American Christians can be steered away from the real causes behind problems.
Well, that's the thing about that is it's even like the satanic stuff is kind of the crazy stuff you get with a lot of these mass events, but even the stuff like the focus on Travis Scott, which I agree probably should stop the concert, but like it's not the entertainer's job to know when the crowd is getting way out of control. And yeah, we're so far away from that where we're letting the police department spread lies about like some sort of mass jabbing of some miracle anesthesia. Like it's sad, but it is the function is to obscure from the real.
Can I just quickly oh, sorry, Naomi, go on.
Go ahead.
I just want to comment on that because we didn't get to it on the show yesterday, but the Houston PD is spreading a mass lie that is being, I mean, I don't know it's a lie, but I assume a cop's lying if they're not providing us with evidence, even though CBS and all these other outlets are reprinting the words as fact that there was a member of the audience going around and pricking officers with fentanyl and security of people with fentanyl, which people at the concert have said is not the case. This is a way for them to hide the fact that they were unable to control the crowd. And so then they can blame, oh, look at this mysterious fentanyl, which they've been doing. And it's been debunked that cops saying that, when I touch fentanyl on this suspect, I'm ODing. When like they've looked into it, it's just panic attacks. They've been debunked all over and over again. And it's a way for cops, one, to heighten their job riskiness. And of course, in this instance, make sure that they deflect blame onto someone like Travis Scott or onto the people at the concert who are mysteriously going around pricking. If any media outlet wants to report that cops were being pricked by a phantom fentanyl needle, ask the cops for the toxicology reports before you spread this misinformation that it's designed to make suburban moms really freaked out because there were a lot of young white fans at this Travis Scott concert. And don't do that. It's journalistic malpractice, and you're just helping cops in their propaganda effort. How many times do cops have to lie about killing people before media outlets learn their lesson? How many times do they have to plant drugs on people and it comes out years later? Stop doing it.
That's right. And not even just that. I was listening to WNYC today where they had all these experts on crowd control. They're literally hired by these major companies, whether it's Live Nation or whoever puts these the actual event facility. And what was very frustrating about that was they were allowing them, these are just crowd control experts, literally saying it was the responsibility of Travis Scott, because they said, well, we trained the musicians to be the eyes because of their perspective. And then later another guy goes on and says, well, you're actually supposed to have somebody from the press box overseeing it who's an expert on that.
Have you met a musician? They're on drugs and alcohol. Like, why would you trust them with a major public safety function?
Yes.
They're also
not their job.
They're like 20 years old.
But I mean, like, there's why is right wing? I mean, I see the New York Post commenting on it, like reposting only Travis Scott's videos of him encouraging the crowd to basically do a mosh pit. Why are they focusing on this black musician with a majority white audience, and then also reposting this stuff about breathlessly repeating what the cops say about fentanyl and not looking upwards, as you say, Naomi, at the event organizers? It's all to maintain certain power structures and obscure different, and this is a cultural issue, but it also touches on all these political things that we.
And there were too many people. This is the one similarity that I'll throw out that's similar to the set is, you know, yes, Alec Baldwin is a producer on the film, and yes, Travis Scott has a stake in his brand, but they're there as the artists. They're not there to be the business mind. You know, when you create these groups, oftentimes, obviously not always, you have the business person, you have the artist, you have, you know, in these projects, and each person has a role. So if Live Nation decided that they wanted to sell more tickets, which it seems very clear that there were too many people in that facility, then, you know, you figure out who was it on and why did they not have the systems in place and why was the plan not followed through? It doesn't, you know, simultaneously with the issues, the cops, who of course want to prop up whatever structures are going to create, never let a crisis go to waste. That's what's happening with the
exactly. So when you see Travis Scott's like apology saying, "I'll work or I'll do whatever for the police department," you know, cooperate with them every way, that's suspicious to me. I don't trust the police department. The police department and the corporate partners are the ones responsible here.
That's right. I would love for Travis Scott to just say that. I don't trust the police.
Yeah. Well,
he might get charges then.
You're right.
Going back to Jay Chavon, he said, touche, MF. Ad hominem. On this week's Double Threat, Tom Sharpling's show with Julie Klausner, John Daly does a lefty Leatherface character, and he's got a great bit about Jimmy Dore and National Socialism. Good stuff. A+ recommend. Oh, I will check that out. Oh, this is good. Since we're also, you know, talking about revisionist history and whatnot, and how embedded these reactions are. Here's Eric Bolling. He's on Newsmax. We have a clip of Fox and Friends doing the same thing too. But you know, they all got the message. You can see we don't need to see every one of the right wingers who are going off on Big Bird, promoting the vaccine to kids. Let's be clear. There is no kid in America between the ages of 5 and 11 who is now eligible for the vaccination who's going to go and get this on his own or her own. They're not going to get it on their own. Mm-hmm. They cannot get it on their own. And it is meant to, and there's no kid between the ages of 5 and 11 who are going to decide, distinct from their parents, that they want the vaccine. That also won't happen. This is not like, Mom, Dad, will you guys get me a Power Ranger for Hanukkah this year? It is meant to make the kids, A, feel less anxious about the idea of getting a shot, and B, to also feel less anxious about catching COVID. Because the dynamic that gets lost in all of this, and this is just as common, if not more common, than any reaction that I've seen amongst kids. And granted, you know, the kids I see are, you know, their parents are not talking about the vaccine being, you know, the devil's spawn. But let's be clear, 80% of the country has gotten vaccinated. The overwhelming number of parents on polls and whatnot are in favor of the masking policies that they've seen from schools, or in favor of vaccine mandates. Overwhelming numbers. Most kids, not necessarily most kids, I haven't seen polling on this, and this is all anecdotal, but there's a lot of kids who are anxious about getting COVID because they can't necessarily decipher the nuance. It's not hard to see kids, at least in New York City, wearing their masks outside. Young kids, because they're nervous about getting it. Because the idea that we had to go into lockdown because there was an unknown pathogen that was going around, that happens once in every 100 years so far, that's a lot for a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, 9-year-old kid to process. The thing I'm excited about with, you know, the vaccination for my son is as much about him relaxing. Like, he is much more vigilant about wearing his mask and nervous about taking it off outside. And I ask, I'm like, dude, you can take it off outside. And I see other kids the same way. I know that he will. I've seen him put it down to, but part of that process is going to be giving them the security of, you can't catch COVID, and you can't catch it and give it to your parents and then become an orphan, which is also a dynamic that I think gets completely missed in this whole thing.
I also think that the Republican, and we'll talk about this when Bowling talks, there's two things here. I think the immediate one is obviously they want to push parents to at least a certain percentage of parents to not have their kids watch Sesame Street. And number two, NPR. Simultaneously, what's happening right now is they're going back to defunding NPR, defunding PBS, which they do every decade or so, as some sort of cultural war. And this is the perfect opportunity to do so.
Well, I have some insight into this, to the nature of this culture war. Here's Eric Bowling.
Speaking of COVID, there was a ton of pushback to the Biden mandates over the weekend. Big Bird is now hawking the jab for 5-year-olds on Sesame Street.
And I've scheduled an appointment for my grandson. We're leaving in a few minutes. Okay. Now, I just need to get one last thing before we go to your appointment, Big Bird. Okay. I'll be right back. All right. And look what I have here is what we needed for your vaccine shot.
Radar.
Teddy bear. Yes, it's time to go, Big Bird.
Good luck, Big Bird. We're rooting for you.
You're going to do great, Big Bird. We'll see you when you get back.
I told you 15 years ago Sesame Street are a bunch of communists, and they're proving it once again. I stand by that assessment.
Very brave.
Put up that. Put up the link to that Times article. Let's see what they were saying 40 years ago, 50 years ago about. Do you have it?
Boom.
It's up. There it is. Mississippi agency votes for a TV ban on Sesame Street. Scroll through. Let's see why. Oh, it must be because they're. Here it is. Okay. Now, a member of the commission said some of the members of the commission were very much opposed to showing the series because it uses a highly integrated cast of children.
What does that mean, Sam?
Well, could be vaccinated and unvaccinated. Yeah, exactly. Could be. Look, Sesame Street was originally developed as an educational tool for inner city kids, mainly black children, who people, there were people who were concerned that they weren't having access to the same educational opportunities. So you got things like Sesame Street and Electric Company, which were oriented towards more city kids, and they were probably the most integrated shows on television at that time. And turned out white suburban kids liked it too, but not down in some areas because that was pretty integrated. And you don't want to give the kids the wrong impression. And that's how it evolves. That's how you can go from saying, like, Sesame Street communist, I told you, to now they're hawking the jab. And that's the culture war, folks. That's the way that it metamorphosizes.
If Mr. Rogers were around today, he'd be doing very similar segments, and despite his own Christian background, they'd be saying the same stuff. They did at the time. He was doing
LeVar Burton, of course.
Yeah, I mean, he was right, exactly. So it's they don't want the children getting too soft, too commie, too loving.
But the problem is right now the opposition is too soft. And obviously, the media is more concentrated and monopolized. That Sesame Street has to go over to where's the HBO now. I'm concerned that this might work this time around, even though I think probably percentage wise, in terms of folks who really feel this way, it's smaller than it was in the 80s or in the 70s. They have so much more power, and we're so weak in terms of our gut instincts that we might lose some funding for these shows.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Look at voting rights. I mean, come on.
Yep. All right, let's go do some IMs and we'll get out of here. Solar Predator Travis Scott had some lackluster comments on Kaepernick back in the day and grew up in the upper middle class of Houston suburbs. He's not political at all, but he doesn't strike me as the type to generally think negatively of police.
He's like 21.
I don't really care.
Yeah, that's all besides the point. Okay, he's no angel, but he shouldn't be in charge of public like safety at a giant festival, especially when he's performing at it. I just like this is basic.
It's stupid.
Leach. I'm HIV positive. I just want to thank Dennis Prager for letting me know that I've never been a pariah. God bless the crisis actors who died in the streets of West Hollywood. 6 Foot Bear. 29-year-old Packers fan here. Emma, just wondering if maybe you go a little deeper into how disappointed you are with Roderick's comments on the Pat McAfee show.
McAfee. He's on right now, isn't he, again?
Someone who grew up watching him with deep admiration, hearing him speak like my parents and grandparents about something he is not fluent in is just sad. He is good at football for sure.
Yeah.
No one doubts that, but football is a team sport. Putting his beliefs over the rest of the team's safety sours his reputation like another former Packers quarterback I know.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say Rodgers is like Favre because Favre is pretty racist, but I'm incredibly disappointed, especially given the fact that, you know, like I've admired how outspoken he was on issues that I agreed with, and thought he was a bit of a different breed as of when it comes to the fact that he was an atheist and he left his very conservative Christian background. It was a very fascinating story to me, but I think I don't know what Shailene Woodley's influence is, but there is a section of...
You know what Joe Rogan's is.
Yeah, we know what Joe Rogan's is. It seems like there are certain people who may not be on the right, but who have proclivities towards naturalness and purity, and they're kind of hippies. He's definitely in that area. And there is an opening for people like Joe Rogan who are now radicalizing those people to the right with the COVID vaccine. And it is clear that Rodgers has gone down that road. And the guy was all about winning in the offseason. I want the Packers, and he was right. The Packers have not put together a winning roster for him, and they should be ashamed of how they built their team for the past years under him. And they could have won many Super Bowls, but they're an ancient organization that behaved like dinosaurs. However, if you were all about winning, dude, you would have gotten vaccinated. And that's what bothers me more than anything. It's selfish.
What's funny is him in that interview saying that it's like the great MLK. He said, you got to stand up against rules that don't make sense. I don't remember MLK quite saying that.
He's lost it.
Yeah, but it's like that's not getting special accommodation to avoid certain rules, which is what Rodgers was getting by having special travel arrangements, is not MLK.
Right. MLK would have said, I'm not getting vaccinated and I will subject myself to not playing and losing my pay. That's what MLK would be like, well, I'm just going to pretend like I'm vaccinated and sneak
in
through
public,
here.
At least.
And yeah, I mean, give me a break.
But Rodgers was his union rep for years for the Green Bay Packers. This was a part of the union's negotiations with the league. He was well aware of this. And I know that when he was flirting with retirement in the offseason, now it's becoming clear why he was doing that. He knew what the rules were. He is well involved with the union negotiations with the league. And if you didn't want to abide by the rules, that's fine, okay? Go do Jeopardy or whatever you wanted to do. But don't come back and then blame the woke cancel culture warriors for this. You knew what the rules were. He's always been involved with player rights in the league, but he's completely misguided in terms of players' rights here. You could have been like Cole Beasley and come out and been an idiot and owned it. Instead, you purposely misled people. And the lying is really, I think, what gets me more than anything, because there are a lot of unvaccinated players like Lamar Jackson or Cam Newton. I don't agree with it, but I don't like to criticize athletes in that way. But anyway, I mean, it's
what he's elaborating. It's more, yeah.
Yeah.
Emma's hurt.
But this is really this has become so far down. It's a cult. I mean, really, at what point when someone's willing to sacrifice their pay and their reputation and their partner's reputation, who, by the way, Shailene did get vaccinated because she's smart enough to realize that her contracts in the future are at stake and she can't go on a set and film something.
I didn't realize that. Did you know that for sure?
Who's that?
Oh, she can't walk on a set. She's filming right now. It's not allowed. You have to be vaccinated, and your managers are part of that. So do you think that they want to lose the money?
Okay, but you don't know that for sure, right? Because there are a lot of Hollywood people getting around that.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of fake vax cards. In
I mean,
Tons.
Fair enough. With that being said, I'm not going to blame Shailene Woodley because this is his responsibility. He's a grown-ass mother heifer man, and he can make his decision. She can answer that when she has to deal with it, if she has to deal with it. But there is an indoctrination here that is beyond Joe Rogan and Alex Ebert. I urge all of you guys from Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. He has been posting these videos for the last 10 months, warning people about this indoctrination on in the yoga left spiritual world, which
we had somebody on. We had somebody on a while back to talk about that. Do you remember who it was? About that world being like a pandemic and all that stuff coming.
It overlaps with the crypto world too, so keep that in mind.
Graham's doing this now too.
It's his videos though. Check them out if you can. They're on Instagram. They're brilliant. He doesn't care. He comes from that world, and he's doing all he can to rebut. But
he's a great guy.
It's not just brainwashing. This is a cult. Can we just call it what it is? This is a cult. You're willing to lose your career and join the Jim Jones, of the world who's got a Spotify contract? That's how I see it at this point.
We've gotten a lot of IMs talking about missing out on Michael's MLK anti-vax impersonation.
That would be amazing.
My shoulder's not going to be magnetized.
Ask me if I'm vaccinated, Emma.
Are you vaccinated, MLK?
Yeah, I'm immunized. Yeah. I hate the left and the right. Politics is bullshit.
Sam's butt joint. Does this democratic institutional lag on drug criminalization, legalization remind you of gay marriage in the aughts and the early teens? It took 10 years for the leadership to finally get on board with that after the Massachusetts case. I feel this similar. I would agree, definitely. It feels that way, but the difference is that marriage equality in the general population was far more controversial, it seems to me, than drug decriminalization at this point. There was 10 people, it was off the record, but I don't care now. Meeting with Obama, the candidate, the primary candidate, I think it was at Netroots at one point or something. And he said, personally I'm for marriage equality, but it's not the right time. It's not he said I
think it came out though.
Maybe it did. He probably said it in another context, but he was like, I wouldn't have, if I was advising, MLK or LGBT, I can't remember who said it was, but, I wouldn't focus on anti-miscegenation laws first. I would start with, whatever it was. But they were definitely waiting for it to get out ahead of them. But drug decriminalization is not nearly as controversial. It has not been weaponized. In 2004, George Bush won that election in part by basically putting referendums on states across the country to prohibit marriage equality. It was there's no similar movement, drug criminalization movement in this country. The time for the Democratic Party to come out full force and do this was yesterday, really. But that to me is what makes it just complete political malfeasance. All right, 4 more of these and then we're out of here. Dank Uger. I guess Peter Thiel was finding Gawker everywhere. Congressional baseball fan. Speed matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my pitch speed. Do you? And well, you should not. For my ally is baseball, and a powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Ephus pitchers are we, not this crude splitter. You must feel baseball around you. Here between you, me, the mound, the backstop, everywhere. Yes, even the foul line and the stands. Oh my God, that's twisted. Ryan Cole. My brother's an intelligent, educated man, also a fundamentalist Christian minister, and believes 100% the devil and demons are real. It's easier to believe that than to accept all people are capable of evil on their own.
This personal responsibility stops at them.
I remember in the late 80s when an entire small town was up in arms protesting and making death threats against the family because a gay man dying of AIDS wanted to be with his family at the end of his life. Oh, no, it was just insane. You can't even imagine. Well, you can. Sam Stones, Mr. Hawley, what would you say is your ideal fantasy of a man? That was such a weird question. What's a man?
Yeah, I know. That was his follow-up to all that garbage that he spewed. What's in a man?
H-dub talking about being men.
Yeah, right.
H-dub, Matt Binder covers the wellness community and anti-vax.
Yes, he does do that very well.
Hawley Vania, what is a man? A miserable little pile of grievances. All right, two more. Michael from Bavaria, Big Bird is the carrot. The stick comes next week when Oscar puts Elmo into a gulag for just asking questions. Oh, God, you guys are great. Violento Garcias, it takes a real man to take another man. All right, last one for sure. I'm sorry. Easy to pronounce. Carlos Maza has a great new video on CRT that goes into how the crisis was manufactured by Rufo and conservative think tanks, along with some history bussing. Brown v. Board would recommend it to everyone. Fair enough. Matt, Bradley, Emma, Naomi, great job today. See you folks tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
To get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice is made for the option where you don't get paid.